Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, do you suffer from FOMO, fear of missing out? How about phantom vibrations or cyberchondria? We look at the dangers of internet addiction. Malika Bilal, our digital producer, is here keeping track of all your live feedback. Malika, our community lives on the internet.
They do.
Are any of them worried that they're addicted?
I think a few of them are, and we asked our community specifically to finish the sentence. You know you're addicted to the internet when? Several of them did answer, and there's one from All the Signals who says, you know you're addicted to the internet when you spend more time inside than outside. So for those of you at home, join the conversation and answer that question. Tweet us using the hashtag AJStream.
Joining us at the table is Dr. Hillary Cash. She is the co-founder of Restart, an internet addiction recovery center. She's also author of Video Games and Your Kids. Hillary, welcome to the stream.
Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Now, this show is all about internet addiction, and many of you are already watching us online, but there's another way that you can get involved with the stream's growing community, and that's by checking out some of the hashtags we're following and tweeting us your thoughts. Take a look at these. Internet addiction, the diagnosis itself, started as a joke by a psychiatrist who was poking fun at the need to medicalize every behavior by putting it into psychiatric terms. That was in 1995. Fast forward to 2012, and internet addiction is accepted by much of the world. See if this sounds familiar.
You know you're addicted to the internet when instead of doing your work, you get stuck in a Facebook, Twitter and Tumblr loop and lose hours of your life. Okay, Mr. Bear, before we go and get your ear fixed, just gonna check Facebook, maybe Twitter, and then Tumblr, and Facebook, and Twitter, and Tumblr, and Facebook, and Twitter, and Tumblr, Twitter, and Tumblr, and Facebook, and Twitter, and Tumblr. Mr. Bear?
All right, that was a lighthearted clip from the comedy group World of the Orange. You can find their full bit on the YouTube channel. But this issue is a serious one, particularly in Asia. Take a look at this infograph. It's from coupons.org, and it shows some 30% of Chinese and Korean netizens are thought to be addicted. And in the US, that number is 1 in 8. Look at this. This is a report from Norton Online Family. It says 24% of global internet users say they can't live without it being the internet, and 1/3 of social media users think they would lose contact with their friends if they didn't have social networks. Yet, some countries still don't recognize the issue as an addiction. So, what is internet addiction, and how do you know if you have it? Joining us now via Skype, graciously from his vacation, is Dr. David Greenfield, Director of the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. Dr. Greenfield, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. How are you?
Very well. I want to start with you. You know, among the psychological and psychiatric community, how much debate is there about whether internet addiction is real?
There's been debate from the beginning. When I started researching this back in the late 1990s, it was a new phenomena, and there was a lot of skepticism. But I think in the medical community now, it's widely accepted that there is a phenomenon that has something to do with the compulsive, addicted, or abusive use of the internet and digital media technologies. What we label it, whether it's internet addiction or something else, is still up for debate. But there's very little debate as to whether there's something going on here.
Dr. Cash, there are no global studies, but anecdotally, what can you tell us about the number of people that are seeking professional treatment or who have been recommended for professional treatment for internet addiction?
Well, I don't know what the statistics turn out to be nationally, but I can tell you that we have had, since we opened Restart, we've had over 3,000 calls in 3 years from parents.
Wow.
And that's a lot of people who are really seeking help. Now, and only actually, the vast majority of those are parents who have found us on their own, rather than from the mental health community making a referral to them. David Greenfield is right that more and more mental health and medical professionals are recognizing the disorder, but there's still a big lag between those who recognize it as a disorder and many who still poo-poo it as a disorder.
So
and
as this is emerging as a possible disorder, it's
Right.
also emerging as a treatment in terms of what you're doing at your center.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And speaking of those who may not recognize it as a disorder, or some members of our community, there's a tweet here from Christopher who says, internet addiction, was book reading ever considered an addiction? There's also a Facebook comment from Diego who says, let's just classify lack of willpower as a disorder and be done with it. But Hillary, there's a video comment here from someone else who seems to be a skeptic. I'd like you to have a listen and let me know what you think.
Sure.
I think it's become more of a compulsive trait than anything else. We'll check our updates frequently, and because that's just the way the pace of the world at the moment. And to label such a thing as an addiction, I believe, would be as clumsy as the fact that this is actually in the latest version of the DSM.
So is this just the pace of the world that we live in today?
Well, I do think it's the pace of the world, but that doesn't mean that the pace of the world doesn't lend itself to addictive behavior. And I think that what's actually happening is that there's a recognition in the medical community and those who are putting together the DSM-5 that addiction needs to be thought of as just existing on a scale from mild to severe. And I think many of us are actually suffering from mild addiction.
I was going to say, we're all wondering what we are, so give us
Yeah.
a sense of what mild and severe would be.
So if you, you compulsively check your iPhone and your email and just want to, and feel uncomfortable when you don't have the opportunity to do that checking, and then let's say you go on vacation and for the first day or two you're really a little bit anxious because you don't have access to it, well, that sounds like a mild addiction.
Okay.
But the person who is really letting their lives completely tumble apart is probably going to be suffering a more severe.
So their academics, if they're a student, are suffering, your
Right.
job might be suffering, your social relationship suffering.
Right. The demographics data indicate that it's those who are of college age that are suffering the most from this, and the statistics are showing anywhere from 13 to 19% of that population meets criteria for internet addiction. And indeed, when we're treating people at Restart, that's mostly the demographics.
So Dr. Greenfield, Dr. Cash, her center mostly treats young people to young adults. Is there a difference in internet addiction between young people and adults, say people in their 30s and 40s?
Well, the content of choice, so to speak, in other words, the drug of choice that people consume online may be different. And I see, my clinic is an outpatient clinic. We have an intensive outpatient program, and we have a regular outpatient program, and we're seeing people much older. I do see the people that have the most issues in terms of gaming are in that demographic.
Having a little
14, 15 on up to early 20s. And then we have another subgroup of people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and up on it to their 60s, who are abusing the internet, particularly in the content area that is sexual.
Okay. So, we have this graphic. I want to show it to you. It's signs of internet addiction. And it says deteriorating social relations, feeling angry or depressed when you can't get online, euphoric happiness when you can get online, restlessness when not online, and lying about internet habits or feeling guilty about use. Are those good indicators for people?
Those are good indicators. I think everybody who is in this field understands that the signs and symptoms are include those signs and symptoms that you've just mentioned.
What else is there, though? What's beyond this that you've got to?
Well, there are a lot of physical outcomes, like chronic sleep deprivation, and then real failure often with either school or work performance. Those would be additional signs and symptoms.
Well, I think a few members of our community, and of course also a couple of the people at this table, might fall under some of those categories. I'm sure we're thinking. There's
Our entire social media team is freaking out.
Lisa. There's a tweet here from Ibrahim, and he says, my average time on the internet is 15 hours a day. There's one more from Rahul who says, without accessing the internet, I can't imagine my day, even my nights. Indispensable part, he says. But there's one more video comment here from a member of our community, and Dr. Greenfield, I'd like you to have a listen.
The problem is not the risk of a potential addiction through the internet, but the long-term effects resulting from such an addiction which we are not able to predict. The internet is addictive because it became a core part of our life. The question what we claim as ill addiction depends on how it influences our core values of humanity in the future.
So are the effects still unknown, Dr. Greenfield?
Effects?
It looks like we're having a little bit of trouble with Dr. Greenfield's audio, but if you'd like to pick up on that, are the effects still unknown? I mean, is the future unknown and what this could mean?
Well, I think the future is unknown because the technology keeps changing. And so as it is advancing and all efforts are in the direction of making it more and more immersive as an experience and more available to us, accessible to us. So I think the problem is going to increase because of that. And what's happening also is that as the next generation grows up and starts having kids and children are exposed to it at earlier and earlier ages, we're going to see quite a profound effect on child development, which and the broad scale effect of that might be difficult to predict.
Okay. In terms of child development, are kids unable to form normal relationships who are addicted to the internet, and does it affect their attention span?
It affects many different areas of functioning, including attention span, because most aspects of the internet that people are getting addicted to require short bursts of attention, right? And so if you're a child who's exposed, let's say from age 4, 5, 6 on to video games and then eventually to the internet itself, the brain is being wired for that short attention span.
Wait, so it's actually chemically or physiologically changing?
Yes, it does actually physiologically change the brain to wire it. The brain is wired according to what it is asked to do. So if what it is asked to do is engage with video games and the internet in this fast-paced, ever-changing way, then that's what the brain is going to get really good at doing, and it will have more difficulty staying focused on tasks and really maintaining concentration on tasks that are not fast-paced in that kind of way.
So does that mean that addiction is a learned behavior?
Well, that is not addiction. What we're talking about in terms of short attention span isn't addiction.
But I mean in terms of you're saying that your brain rewires itself and it learns how to behave this way, can it, my thought process is then, can it unlearn it?
Addiction can be unlearned. The trouble with addiction can be unlearned to only a certain extent. The way the changes that the brain goes through involve a sensitization of the pleasure centers in the brain and strong associations with those things ancillary to what you're addicted to. So in the case of the internet, once you become an internet addict, then anytime you're sitting in front of a computer, it's going to trigger the craving that will lead to the addictive behavior. So once that has occurred, it is not easy for that to go away. Over time, they say any addiction takes about 2 years for the brain to kind of rewire itself back to more normal function. And so if a person can slowly wean themselves down from addictive behavior, maintain that for at least 2 years, then they're going to be much less susceptible, but they'll always be somewhat vulnerable to having that craving that they themselves can't control.
Well, because in the case of internet addiction, you're still having the alcoholic work in the bar.
That's right.
That's right. A tough one. That's a challenge for you.
That's right. And so we have to think of it more in terms of harm reduction, that we're trying to teach people how to have a healthy relationship to their computers. And that means that they may have to make some commitments to not engaging at all in certain things that they simply cannot have control over.
Well, speaking of creating those healthy relationships, a few of our community members have noted the irony that we're asking this question on a show based around the internet. There's a Facebook comment here from Phyllis who says, I've heard there are 12-step programs for internet addictions, but you have to go online to get to them. And a tweet from Alia who says, the fact that you're asking this question on the net is the answer to your question.
Well, how about that internet addiction survey?
Exactly.
Right? Okay, so Malika was tweeting out earlier about this internet addiction survey, which we will all send you the link so you can check it out. But some of the questions that are on it are things like, how often do you find that you stay online longer than you intended? How often do you neglect household chores? How often do you prefer the excitement of the internet to intimacy? And people actually answered this stuff, right?
They did. We actually got several responses. There's one from Nasima who says she got a 58 on the test. She says she was told you're experiencing occasional or frequent problems because of the internet. You should consider the full impact on your life. No, occasional or frequent problems, it kind of sounds like a different kind of illness. And speaking of different kind of illnesses, there's a video comment from a member of our community talking about whether or not this is ripe for being listed as one of those.
My name is Alexander Wilson, and I'm posting this from Austin, Texas. I just want to say I think it's pretty typical for the American Psychiatric Association to be the last on board to recognize a potentially serious disorder like internet addiction. Unfortunately, their approach to medicine and mental health is very flawed and influenced by monetary interests. Until Big Pharmacy introduces some anti-Facebook addiction patch or a pill you can swallow to curb your interest in YouTube videos, we're not going to see the American Psychiatric Association adding internet addiction to the DSM.
Dr. Cash, he's taking a shot at you.
Oh, I don't feel like he's taking a shot at me at all.
No?
No, I think that he's just very cynical about the American Medical Association and those who put together the DSM. And, you know,
Is he right?
Well, I'm not quite as cynical as he is. I think that this field is new, and it's going to take a while for them to feel that all of the research is in, which will tip the scale. It took quite a few years for them to officially recognize alcoholism. It took them several decades before they decided that there was enough evidence to include gambling as an addiction. So I think it's inevitable that it'll happen. I don't quite share his cynicism, but you know, but I understand. I think many people are cynical.
Dr. Greenfield, glad to have you back, by the way, on the phone with us. What's your thought on the comment that we just heard from one of our viewers? Has the American Psychiatric Association been slow on the uptake on this one?
Well, you know, actually, I agree with Dr. Cash. It took decades for gambling to be accepted. I mean, when alcohol abuse and addiction was being promoted among the lay community, there was a feeling that it represented a character weakness, and it took decades of grassroots support for the Psychiatric Association to begin to recognize it as an addiction. Quite frankly, I actually think that we're doing quite well. The studies that we started to do on this were just in the mid to late 1990s, and we're 15 years into this, and we're already being considered for inclusion. So I think we're on a fast track to being recognized, although it never happens as quickly as one would like. So I think I'm optimistic that it will be recognized. It probably will not be called internet addiction. It will probably be called digital media compulsion or something similar to that, something that reflects all the digital media, because the truth is it's not really just internet, because the largest segment of growth in the addicted community that we're starting to see is among smartphone users, because that's the active portal that most people are starting to use for their internet access. So it's not real. It's changing. The demographic and the way the technology is being used and abused is changing drastically.
Doctor, what about China and South Korea? It sounds like they're being pretty aggressive on this front.
Oh, China and Asia. I've been lectured in Asia a few times, and they have a huge problem, and they consider it a huge public health epidemic, in part because there are differences in the culture, and a lot of the internet is being abused in these internet cafes or cyber cafes, and there's literally one on every street corner in Korea and in China. So there are thousands of these places where the youth culture hangs out and uses and abuses the internet, and they do suffer significant negative sequelae to the problem. In other words, major spheres of their life are impacted in terms of academic performance and employment performance, family disruption, really serious issues. They have a real problem over there. It's worse there than it is in the United States, but the United States has a different culture. We're more individualistic, so we tend to use it more in the privacy of our own homes, and so the problem looks different in the United States than it does in Asia.
Well, David, our community agrees. Eyebrow Special 84 says net addiction is so high in Korea and China because they are the fastest growing economy presently, and they keep increasing in technology. But David, I'd like to pose something a little bit different to you. There's a question here, a comment rather, on Facebook from CJ Julian, who says, if being addicted to the information is a problem, then I have that problem. I suppose we could go back to the way it was before the internet, reading the papers, watching TV, to get our information or to communicate with others, but why?
Well, there's something unique, and I think this is important to mention, about the medium of the internet itself that's very different than consuming information from other modalities. Obviously, the interactivity is part of it, but really what happens when you consume information on the internet is you search for something, whether it's a text or something, you're surfing for something, or an email, or you're surfing Facebook for an update. You get a hit. A hit is when you find something that is desirable or pleasurable or salient to you. The problem, or the challenge with the internet, is that you cannot predict when you're going to get that hit, and you can't predict what it's going to be. You don't know when you're going to get that good Facebook listing or that good piece of information or the email or text that you like. And because you don't know when it's going to happen and you don't know what it's going to be and how much you're going to like it, that creates what's called a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. In essence, the internet is the world's largest slot machine. And we have the same addictive potential in terms of the increase of dopamine that we do when we gamble on a slot machine. The brain loves the unpredictability and the pleasure from that unpredictability.
Okay. Dr. Greenfield, I'm going to have to stop you right there because we're about out of time, but don't go away because we're going to continue this conversation in our online post show. And I want to pick up with, as a society, how do we deal with this when moderate forms of this addiction are accepted? So think about that, and we're going to get over to Malika with some other leads that we're following.
A filmmaker in Berlin has announced he's going to spend 1 year without using any copyrighted products. Sam Muirhead calls his project the Year of Open Source and will use only products released under open licenses, or products he makes, from clothes to software to toothpaste. He's documenting the adventure on his website. Take a look.
Mall and buy some. I need to find companies that sell open source clothing, if they exist, or I can hunt down open source patterns and make them myself. Or I can just spend a year rocking a toga. But open source making isn't just DIY. I'm always going to be looking for ways to use technology to automate or improve production, to make projects replicable by others. Can I 3D print jeans? Can robots cook me breakfast? Oh, thank you very much.
Muirhead says the point is to untangle himself from the world of consumerism and get others involved in the open source movement. Our next lead looks at a Google initiative mapping the global arms trade. This visualization shows small arms and ammunition transfers around the world between 1992 through 2002 up to 2010. The U.S. is the leader in civilian and military arms imports and exports, but each country is traceable, with the blue bars showing imports and the orange and yellow indicating exports. The map debuted just days after the UN failed to reach agreement on a global arms treaty. And our last lead's from Reporters Without Borders, which has launched a campaign to highlight the killings of 38 journalists in Syria since March 2011. To start, viewers are asked to scan the QR code on the screen with their smartphone. They're then taken to this page, a fictional Twitter feed of an amateur or professional journalist in Syria. Killing those who share information is killing information, the group says, ending the campaign by calling on viewers to share the application. Tell us what you think. Tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, the post show is next. It's streamed at aljazeera.com, so we hope to see you there where we continue our discussion on internet addiction. Take care. Welcome back to the Online Post Show. We're talking about internet addiction. Joining us in studio is Dr. Hilary Cash. Joining us via Skype and or phone is Dr. David Greenfield. And Hilary, I want to pick up with you on this idea of, as a society, how do we deal with this problem if moderate to even more aggressive forms of this are seen as normal and are accepted?
Well, I think it's a matter of public education. South Korea does a really good job of having a public education campaign, and now out at Restart, we were visited by a delegation from South Korea, and so we learned a lot about how they are approaching this, and they take a very proactive stance with the general public and also in schools. And so children from the age of 10 on are being actually screened for internet addiction, and they receive treatment if they meet criteria for it.
Is that too young?
No, it's not too young. The younger the better. If the sooner we can get to kids and teach them really how to have a more appropriate relationship to digital technology, the better off they're going to be.
Well, Dr. Greenfield, I'd actually like to pose a question to you from Twitter. This is from Charisse, who says, do you think internet addiction will have the same stigma as gambling or drug addiction? And then I would add to that, even cigarette use. You told our producers in our pre-interview that you could see a time when, cell phones would be banned in restaurants just like smoking and cigarettes are banned in restaurants. Do you see that time coming, and is that in our near future?
Yeah, I actually do see that time coming. I don't know that it'll be next week, but I do think in the next year or two we're going to start to see social norms being developed around the use and abuse of the technology. There is a sense, a growing groundswell of dissatisfaction with the amount that this technology is being consumed and the way it's being consumed. We haven't really developed new social norms for its use in public. We are starting to develop some aggressive norms with regard to its use while people drive. I just got back from presenting a paper at a driving safety conference, and there's a huge issue with smartphone use and abuse while people are driving, and there are deaths that are associated with the abuse of texting and emailing and surfing, believe it or not.
Right, and in the U.S. here, of course, we're starting to see more and more ads telling people of the dangers of texting and driving. But what about the issue of stigma? Will we see a stigma surrounding that?
I would say that the stigma is not going to be as great. There is a very positive valence around technology. People really see technology as something very, very useful and educational and scientific and very, very productive. I think some of that reputation is not accurate because most people use it for recreation and play as opposed to productivity. But so I don't know that it's going to have the same negative stigma. Perhaps, though, driving and using the technology will have that stigma because we're having organizations develop just like MAD for alcohol, where I've seen these people speak. These are individuals who have lost family members to people who are texting and who killed them. So there are a lot of issues coming up with that area.
So how do you break free of internet addiction?
Well,
first, you have to have consciousness of your use of the technology, and because the internet is not something that you can avoid using today, it's not realistic to assume. What we do with our patients is we actually we find out the content areas that they have the most problems with, and we have an IT person that works with us where we install very sophisticated filters and blocks and controls in their routers and in their technology itself to limit their access to the websites and to the areas that they have the most problems with. And we have found that to be very successful. But you can't eliminate the use of internet. You just have to learn to manage it better and to be conscious of how you use it and abuse it and how and why you use it like a drug. Because you have to recognize that you're using it as a drug and then manage your use.
Hilary, what are some of the troubling content areas that you see?
Well, sex is one of them. There's a huge, burgeoning sex industry. Video games is another, gambling online, social networking online, chat forums of all kinds. All of these things are popular and have the potential to be highly addictive.
Is there a difference between men and women? I mean, in some of the studies we saw, the usage is about the same, but in terms of what they're doing or the harmful effects of it, does it vary between men and women?
Well, I think the harmful effects turn out to be similar in terms of a person's life really falling apart when they become severely addicted, whatever it is, whether they're a man or a woman. But the statistics are showing that men are more drawn to the pornography and to video gaming. Women are more drawn to the social networks and social networking sites and some of the casual games that are readily available through Facebook and other places like that.
We're speaking of the differences between men and women, but what about the differences in between the ages? Philip says, internet addiction is a problem for younger people. Go climb a mountain, get outside, have some fun. But it is the great equalizer, he says. Is this true? Is it just a problem for younger people?
No, it's not just a problem for younger people. There are older people who are getting used to the technology, getting addicted to it as well. The largest demographic are young adults, because among the teenagers, parents are often still managing to maintain some boundaries with the technology, but once they go off to college and those boundaries are gone and they're on their own, they often are falling off the cliff right down into an addiction. But people of any age certainly have the capacity to become addicted, and many do. People are often driven there by their loneliness, by boredom, by dissatisfaction with life.
So, Dr. Greenfield, we've talked about how this affects people in terms of pornography or online gaming or social media, but talk about this component of internet addiction as it relates to the new workaholism, how it's allowed people to pretty much work morning to night nonstop. What do you see in that realm?
Yeah, that's a very big issue, because the the work world has adopted technology, especially portable technology, as a godsend, and assumes that it increases productivity. But there's lots of new data coming out that actually the ability to be accessible and having to be hyper vigilant in terms of that accessibility 24/7 actually decreases productivity, and that there are really significant effects both in terms of mental health, physical health, as well as optimal performance that are impacted by being on and available all the time, that we're really not designed to have those elevated levels of cortisol and arousal 24/7. And the corporate community is just starting to recognize this. There were some announcements recently that came out from a conference recently by some major corporations that this technology is addictive, and that perhaps corporations need to start looking at how and when it's used and how much it's used.
Hillary, you want to follow up on that? I saw you nodding your head.
Well, there is a lot of research about the effect of stress, and that is the result of this constant being connected. And stress does reduce the brain's ability to function at optimum levels, and the brain needs to rest. In order for the brain to transport new information, new learning into the regions for long-term storage, it has to actually have time to rest. And people are not getting enough sleep to allow that to happen, and they're also not just taking quiet time during the day for that to happen. So we are suffering. And in many ways, emotionally, there's a dysregulating effect that all of this has. Our relationships are suffering, our physical health is suffering. We suffer in many ways when we don't we don't feel free because our jobs expect us to just always be working and always available, or because we just are addicted and we don't want to put down the technology.
David, we're talking about our brains being rewired, and a question here on Twitter, though, is that how do you draw the line when your work is dependent on the net? And I know Lisa brought this up a little bit earlier, but if our brains are being rewired, for those of us who are required to be in this business and on the net, how do we change that? Your quick thoughts on that as we wrap up the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you have to use it 8 or 10 hours a day, that's better than having to use it 20 hours a day. So I think some of the answer is to moderate your use when you're not working, and to set some limits for companies to start setting limits in terms of their expectations for their employees to use the technology when they're not working. And if people are abusing the technology when they're on their off time, people need to start setting limits on how much and how often they use it.
All right, Dr. David Greenfield, Dr. Hillary Cash, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to our community. We'll see you tomorrow.